Hello, welcome back. It's Christopher Taylor with Sovereign Harmony. Thought I'd do something a little bit different this time, give you something more visual. So I'm sharing my screen with you today. You can see it's May 3rd, just before 3 p.m. on the west coast of the US. And I wanted to go into what's happening, especially the next couple of weeks here in May, but also look out toward the summer and into the fall, especially regarding this whole COVID-19 situation. If you saw my last video, that was filmed on March 20th. And at that time, that was the first week these lockdowns started. I would recommend going back and watching that if you have not. It's the most recent video before this. And in that video, I went over some of the energies that I'm going to review here today, but get a little more specific now that we have a couple of months of data, or about a month and a half worth or so since the last time I spoke with you. So I don't have that wonderful backdrop of Sedona at this point. I'm actually back in California, right by the beach, which is tough to even utilize because of all the police presence. And you can, if you saw my last video, you'll know that even though at that time we were told the lockdowns would be a couple of weeks or so, and then things would open up. And at that time, I was pretty skeptical of that. And that had a lot to do with the energies. You can see Saturn right here, Pluto right there. Pluto's still in Capricorn. Saturn at the start of this year in January was right with Pluto. In fact, the great thing about this little tool is planetwatcher.com. If you know how to interpret planets, this is a wonderful tool because it lets you know exactly what's happening and when. So for example, I'll talk about Saturn retrograde in a bit, but I can also just click on Saturn retrograde, and that's going to take us to May 10th at 9:10 p.m. Pacific time, my local time, and that's when Saturn goes retrograde. And so it's really neat how you can just kind of jump around. And so we can always click back to where we are now. So it's the present moment. But I just want to show you, for example, if we go back to January and go up a couple of days, I think it was exact around this date right there. There it is, Pluto 22:47, 22 degrees 47 minutes. Saturn 22 degrees 48 minutes. They're essentially conjunct right around that date. So in mid-January essentially, and that's what's kicked off this whole heavy, you know, um, Capricorn lockdown kind of energy. And so if we come back to the present, and anyway, so like I mentioned in the last video as well, there's Jupiter, which is still kind of close to Pluto, and they started their conjunction in April, early April, about a month ago, and that's going to continue through November, like I mentioned in the last video. And so this is a nice way. So instead of just me saying it, if you're not really familiar and it's hard to keep track of all these planets and whatnot, this is a nice way to see the actual visual. And of course, another reason why I'm doing this way is because I don't really have a place to go outside where I won't get hassled with that nice Pluto and Saturn and Jupiter in Capricorn energy, where it's essentially a police state out there if you actually have the audacity to sit alone and not be moving, because we all know how much of a threat that is to our health and the spread of any kind of virus. And I'm obviously being facetious, but this also goes back to what I said in the last video, where this can be taken advantage of, essentially this kind of virus situation, which at the time the projected numbers had this at pandemic levels. 2.2 million Americans, for example, would be expected to die with no intervention, and something like 250,000 with strong intervention. And here we currently sit May 1st, and the CDC just recently made some adjustments to make their numbers more realistic. And the deaths in the US are at about 37,000. I mean, that's a lot, but it's still less than half of the amount that died. About 80,000 died 2 years ago from the flu. And at that time, hospitals actually were overwhelmed in some places. And one of the themes this time around, we were doing this social distancing thing and lockdown to prevent hospital overwhelm, which is fine, especially if it's going to be a pandemic. But in a lot of cases throughout the US, hospitals have furloughed employees, not only because the regular practices in the hospitals have been postponed and suspended due to the virus crisis, but there hasn't been the number of virus sufferers that we thought would be according to the original projections. And so it's, like I said, it's great to see this now a month and a half later, and can understand, where I was coming from back in March. This idea that this lockdown energy could have been instigated by any kind of catalyst. In this case, the catalyst was the virus. Okay, but this lockdown essentially was almost inevitable for some reason, right? And so we're starting to see that just from a numbers basis, that it may not be that pandemic that was expected. And that's good news. I mean, we should be uniting as a collective in relief that this is true. But instead, there's still divide and everything because of how information is portrayed to the media, et cetera, et cetera. But that's what's going to take us to our discussion today here, essentially with Venus and Gemini, which if we get ourselves back to right now, Venus right now, there's Venus in Gemini about 20 degrees. It's poised to go retrograde here next week on the 12th. And Venus and Gemini in general is a very chatty, very social kind of energy. And it's been in Gemini, I think, since about the beginning of April, so for the last several weeks. And it's going to stay in Gemini through early August because of this retrograde that'll be happening here, starting May 12th, ending on June 24th. But basically, the entire months of April, May, and June, like I mentioned in the last video, is a time of a lot of information sharing and a lot of data sharing and a lot of bringing us back to essentially reality, not projections, because projections, if you have no data, projections are all you have to work with, but they have no value once there is data. And that's the kind of the realizations we're coming to now. And it's like, what are we doing with such drastic lockdowns for something that's not showing itself to be as scary as it was proposed? And again, that's a good thing. That's something we should be collectively celebrating, no matter what our opinions are, that a virus is much less deadly than expected. That's wonderful. And so, but where do we go from there? And how do we get out of these lockdowns? How do we gradually open things up and actually find some sense of normalcy? And you keep hearing that phrase tossed around, the new normal. And, to me, that's just a rebranding of the term New World Order, which is the old energy. And if you listen to my last video, that's what, when Saturn hit Pluto in January, that signified the beginning of the end of the old guard, the old energy. And so those old energies that really want to have massive controls over people and resources across the globe, that's starting to crumble. And you can see this last act, this taking advantage of this virus that, thank God, is not as deadly as was expected, and using it to further that agenda, or attempt to further that agenda. And we'll get a little bit more into that as well. But anyway, so some things happening coming up here in the near future. A big change tomorrow. If you notice right here, the list, this is the kind of list of things that just happened, a list of things that are upcoming. So tomorrow, this Venus-Neptune square that I just clicked on, you can see Neptune there, Venus here, from Pisces to Gemini. That's a square that's going to last a few months, basically May, June, and July. And I'll just show you that. And that's because of the retrograde. So if we just went up 1 month, so June 2nd, now Venus will still be retrograde. Neptune will still be about where it was. And then we go another month ahead, Venus still in Gemini, but now it's direct. And it will take until, I believe it's something like right around here, July 27th. Now notice it's going to be back exactly where they were at 20 degrees Pisces, 20 degrees Gemini, on July 27th, which is where they're going to be for the first time tomorrow, or to actually that's later tonight, West Coast time. That's going to be about 9 o'clock tonight. And so this is a long-term, 3-month long connection here, this square between Venus and Neptune. And so this is going to play out with the information sharing and the almost a too much information kind of situation that we're going to experience here the next few months. So April is kind of the warm-up month for that, but May through July is going to be the real, holy cow, I can't believe that's true kind of energy, and with lots of disclosure kind of energy. And we've had a preview of this here in this month of April, and some examples. For example, there was an email drop essentially, and allegedly includes emails from members of the World Health Organization and Bill Gates and all other players on this, in the old energy that wants to essentially, control the medical field in people's bodies and et cetera, as far as that old order, or what they're now calling the new normal. Okay. I don't know what's in there. I haven't dived into it myself, but I'm guessing others are doing that right now, and that's probably a big part of what's going to come out here in the next few months as well. There was also this release of alien disclosure, essentially not alien but UFO disclosure, where it was basically just showed, yep, this is a video of UFOs, never been identified. We don't know what they were. We don't know what was going on there. It doesn't give us too much information. It's a little tease, but it's essentially letting us know, yeah, there's more to be, more to be learned here, and that could be a preview of what's to come the next few months as well. Um, there's also been, like information, if you haven't, looked into it. There's some pretty good evidence that Dr. Fauci, who is the head of the CDC, essentially the spokesperson with Trump's team, that he, for whatever reason, and there could be a good excuse for it, there might not be, but for whatever reason, was funding a lab in Wuhan in China. And it's a lab that there is evidence that's suspected, nothing's proven yet, that that's where the virus may have come from. Just can't conclude anything from that, but again, teaser information that might bring out even more. If people aren't familiar with the film Out of Shadows that came out, it's a YouTube documentary. It's like an hour and 15 minutes long. I recommend seeing it. I mean, there was nothing new in it for me. I tend to dive into a lot of weird topics and stuff. But it does put some things together pretty nicely in terms of the CIA's involvement in the media, as well as Hollywood and how Hollywood and entertainment work to program the collective mind, et cetera, in the same way that the media would be used by the CIA, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, if you want more on that, Out of Shadows would be something you can watch. But that, I only bring that up because that came out right around the time when Venus entered Gemini, right about here in early April. That's when that came out. And again, that's teaser information. It doesn't dive too deep. It's a good intro. And you can dive a lot deeper into a lot of the topics that are on there. But a lot of information that it talks about might come out and might become more clear on a more mainstream level. Another thing was, and I know a lot of people made fun of Trump for this, et cetera. I think it was last weekend, actually. I think we can go back to, I think it was the 25th, started the 25th, when Mercury, right here, about 25 degrees Aries, was squaring Pluto at 25 degrees Aries, 25 degrees Capricorn. And so this was, information that came out here has a sort of strong connotation to it. And one thing that came out there was a suggestion of some alternative forms of treating, whether it's virus, bacteria, etc., with using UV light to disinfect. And everyone took that out of context and said that Trump said drink bleach or inject bleach or something like that. But that's just, ignorance in terms of the technologies that are available. And from my position, I don't really care who's saying what. I just care what's being said. To see the team that's in charge, or to know that the team that's in charge of looking for solutions to this virus is considering alternative methods that already exist and have already been used for many decades. It's not like it's new. People just haven't heard of it. But that's a very benign, gentle, inexpensive, and effective way to treat viruses and bacteria, et cetera, unlike the more expensive and profitable methods like vaccines, et cetera. And so the very fact that it was mentioned, that it goes so against the World Health Organization, their model, et cetera, was to me just like a wow. I can't believe that was just even mentioned on, live on the air, and the repercussions that could come from that. And just to preview that, or to have that be a preview for something coming later this year. So we have Mercury squaring Pluto. Now watch what happens when we go ahead a couple of months here. Let's go into like August, okay? This is when, we can pull it back a few more days, when Mars, now in a similar position, is going to be making that square to Pluto. And that, because Mars will be going retrograde in September and into November, the period from August to November then has an extended square between Mars in Aries and Pluto in Capricorn, just like the extended square that I talked about that's just starting tomorrow between Venus and Neptune. Okay, and so the ideas when Mercury was here back, a week ago, when Mercury was here squaring Pluto, get put into action at this time. And so it could be, a several month rollout, August, September, October, November, where maybe it's not the UV treatment, maybe it is, but the idea that alternative methods outside of the World Health Organization's model might be implemented. And that's, a key word for Mars would be implementation, doing, getting it done. And that could, if it all worked out, would eradicate the idea of this virus resurging in next winter, right? And that would really kill the whole, again, World Health Organization model for how this should be approached and treated, et cetera. So we could be looking at some breakthroughs here. And if we come back to where we are, a lot of that could be related to the Venus situation that's happening here, all the information that's going to come out over the next few months when Venus is retrograde in Gemini and it's squaring that Neptune. Now that square to that Neptune makes things a little confusing. It's hard to know what to believe, what is true or what's not true. And I think we're going to see what we saw a preview in April of as well is a lot more censorship in the media. So people are getting kicked off Twitter, off Facebook, off YouTube, for basically suggesting anything outside of that, again, old guard model, which includes the World Health Organization, for how this kind of a situation should be approached. Okay, and so we could be seeing a lot of reasonable information being shared by people over the next, again, we can go ahead a few days here. Venus goes to about 21 degrees and it starts going backwards. When it turns red, that's backwards, basically. You get the gist of it. So, but notice how all this stuff, especially as we get to the end of May here in a few weeks, Gemini starts getting pretty packed. Gemini is an energy of, again, information sharing, curiosity. So it's a hard time to keep information secret. Let's put it that way. So be careful what information you listen to over this time period, but it's also going to be a time when, like I said, all these things that are being potentially disclosed get a little deeper and we learn a little bit more and secrets are revealed and things of that nature. What's going to also help that, to come back to right now, if we look at the nodes, so this symbolizes, this little horseshoe symbolizes the north node of the moon, and it travels through a sign backwards. It takes about a year and a half or so. It's about to change, and this actually happens tomorrow. We look right here. This is where the north node's going to hit Gemini. Click on that, and that's about just before 11 p.m. on Monday, May 4th on the West Coast. That's going to last about a year and a half. That switch into Gemini makes a big difference, okay? Especially when it comes to this information sharing. Okay, so the South Node then will be in Sagittarius rather than Capricorn. The last year and a half, it's been the South Node in Capricorn, so we've been kind of releasing that old structure of energies, and embracing kind of the truth in our own hearts and kind of what we know to be true, no matter what we're told is true. It's kind of knowing what is true. And now it switches into Gemini with the South Node in Sag, and now we have this whole instead, what we're going to be doing is releasing over the next year and a half the idea of defending our philosophy and beliefs and putting it on the ground in our daily lives. That's kind of the Gemini energy, is a daily activities on a daily basis. And so this has a lot to do with that truth coming down to earth. Okay, so if we've been convinced of certain things being true, then we're kind of awakened to what is true. So movies like Out of Shadows does that, for example. If there's any information in those email drops that could bring us down to earth with what we have to deal with, who knows what that is. Or if there's beliefs about what, methods of approach to viruses should be, we might, be brought down to earth with what could also be used, other options. Gemini is a very flexible energy. So I don't, it's going to be very difficult to maintain this energy of lockdown despite, Pluto still being in Capricorn, and Saturn's going to backtrack into Capricorn. We just go ahead about a month or two. There we go. So by the time we get into late June, early July, Saturn's back in Capricorn as well. So this last ditch effort essentially by the old guard is certainly still in play, and it will be in play through November as long as Jupiter and Pluto are conjunct. So we do got a little, a long way to go here, at least several months of this kind of battle back and forth. But because of all this energy in Gemini, the Venus retrograde, etc., coming over the next few months, this is the time for all that information to get out and get shared. But it's also going to be a time where the censorship is going to be on a high note because of all the truth that's getting shared. But then on the negative side, there's a potential for false information to get shared as well. Okay, but it's up to us to use our own intuition and our own discernment to really figure out what is true and what is useful, what we can actually utilize on a daily basis with that Gemini energy coming down the pipe. So again, that switch in the nodes starts tomorrow night. So this should be a noticeable shift because the Capricorn Cancer axis is a little more steady and sturdy. And so it was more fit for people being locked down. This is going to be a little too social, a little too movable, all at a time when Venus is in Gemini as well. And so it's not favorable for that kind of holding energy in place in a rigid fashion. Okay. But what also is coming up next week, so I'm pointing over here at the 10th, 12th, and 14th, we have retrogrades coming right after another. I already clicked on this earlier. Saturn goes retrograde next week on the 10th. Then Venus goes retrograde on the 12th. There's Venus. And then Jupiter, a couple days later, goes retrograde on the 14th. And what's significant about this is, in fact, if we can go back even to just a few days ago, April 25th, this was last week as well, this is when Pluto went retrograde. So the same day that Mercury was squaring Pluto last weekend, that was when Pluto went retrograde. And that was the first sense of relief in a release of that pressure. So if you can think, all the planets were in direct motion. With all the direct motion, especially focused in Capricorn, that is a very repressive energy. There's a lot of momentum behind it. So if a lockdown is enacted while it's in place, it's hard to lift that off. Okay, and as these planets start going retrogrades, we had the first pop last weekend. Pluto went retrograde, so it's kind of like one sense of relief. And what happened in the last week? We have some states and some nations opening up finally, maybe on a minimal basis, but there is that start toward opening happening. So that's that first sign. So as we move into next week, toward the middle of May, we're going to see a lot more of that release of that pressure. So it's kind of just lifting that momentum that was pushing everything into a repressive state, kind of backing off. So retrogrades aren't always a bad thing, and they always get a reputation for being more of a negative time. They're not necessarily negative. They can be very positive. And this is one of those times where we can start feeling that repression lifted, in that sense of a little more freedom. And it comes with the switch of the nodes into Gemini and Sag, which also goes along with that. Okay, now that being said, it doesn't mean that we're out of the woods, that the virus is gone, and that there's not going to be a battle here to try to still keep up the narrative that we need to keep people locked down and prevent gatherings and all that. That's going to persist throughout the summer into the fall, which is when the people on pushing that narrative and that don't want this new reality to come in, that's born on these new awarenesses of what is actually true, to set in. They want to create, keep that old guard in and create the new normal. So you can think of it like the battle between the new normal and the new reality. And the new reality is beneficial and supportive to human beings, whereas the new normal is beneficial and supportive to those on top that control the human beings. That's really the way to look at it. And so this battle is going to ensue throughout the summer into the fall, like I said. But we are going to notice a lift on that repression here that already started, and it's going to continue the next couple of weeks. And then where it goes from there is hard to say. But what I do want to bring up in the near future during the Venus retrograde, so while that's all going on, is we're going to have a couple of eclipses in June. So one will be on, I think, June 5th, and that's going to be this lunar eclipse right here. So you can see there's the moon about 15 degrees Sag. So that's going to be a lunar eclipse June 5th in Sag. So welcoming in that North Node in Sag and Gemini. And also, it's going to be very close. The sun will be very close to Venus, which will be retrograde at the time. So that's significant happening. And then we go a few days, a couple weeks into the future. There's going to be a solar eclipse. There it is. There it is on June 20th. That's going to be right on the solstice. It's 0 degrees Cancer. When the sun enters Cancer, that's the solstice. And so this new moon happens literally within hours of the solstice. So it's kind of a new beginning energy. And all the while this is happening in June, I'm going to bring your attention over to Mars and Neptune. So now if we go back, we'll go back about a month. We'll start moving up a few days. So Mars is going to enter Pisces the same day that Venus goes retrograde on May 12th next week. Okay, and that has some significance because Pisces is a sign that has to do with not only deception but also infection and things like that. Okay, and so we have Mars entering Pisces the same day Venus goes retrograde, and it's going to have an inevitable meeting with Neptune coming up shortly after. And then when that happens, is going to be, I'm going to shoot up here through June. I think it's around June 12th. Yep. And so on June 12th, actually, the moon will be there too. If we can go back a few hours and have the moon right there at 20 degrees, look at that. All at 20 degrees Pisces. So June 12th in the evening Pacific time, this could be a significant date, plus or minus a couple of days. And it happens right in between the eclipses, right? And while Venus is retrograde. So when I talked about the information sharing and what's true and what's not, at the very least, this really, I think we're going to see numbers come out or projections of numbers come out, again, similar to what we saw in like March, right? And this new fear of a resurgence. That's my guess. Could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But at this time, unlike the last time, now the planets are not favorable for people accepting this sort of lockdown, especially since the numbers are kind of showing that pandemic prediction was a bit of a wolf cry, crying wolf in a way, and maybe it was unintentional. Maybe we did what we took precautions because it was the best information we had, and it's better to over prepare than under prepare. So what? But if it's attempted to happen another time, that's going to pose problems, especially where the energies are. There's not going to be very good agreement to it this time around if it were to happen again here. But there's going to be some sense of misinformation of data, a misrepresentation of data, and there probably will be a second wave. We know there's going to be, but how big that's going to be, it might be manipulated for the cause that is trying to keep the old energies around. That might be manipulated. But if it isn't manipulated, it's real. It's going to be hard for anyone to believe it. So it causes a problem either way. And so I feel like June is going to be a very interesting month to see which way things turn. I think based on the momentum of the energy following that things are going to move forward quite rapidly. And that's when in August, if we go ahead a month, that's when there's going to be Mars. Oh, sorry, going to August. There it is. Mars is going to be in that square to both Jupiter and Pluto, that Jupiter-Pluto conjunction. And that's when we're getting into action mode, very strong action mode. And this is where the real battle between the old guard that wants the new normal and the new energy that wants the new reality. And that new reality, again, based on information that is revealed to us that we might not have been allowed to see or hear before. And that ultimately frees humanity from oppressive situations like central banking systems, for example, that might be rapidly transforming at this moment. Okay, so that's one way this can go. But I really think that again we're going to see a lift off essentially of these restrictions here in the next couple of weeks, just like it's happening already now. And then in June there might be a resurgence of the idea that we should lock back down. And whether or not it's based on true data or not is going to be where there's question marks. Okay, and then that's going to be followed by this kind of taking action, and that action could involve utilizing methods to address the virus that are not part of that World Health Organization model of vaccination, et cetera, and are instead using viral treatments, et cetera, that really prevent it from being a pandemic anymore. And if you have a way to treat something and it's inexpensive and effective, well, then you essentially don't have to worry about people getting it anymore, right? And that's really a new paradigm, because our whole medical paradigm has been very much not an allowance of that kind of simple solution approach. Um, and anyway, so you can see it's a big mess going on here as we move through. But just understand that, where we stand now and go back to now, that things coming up on the horizon are the initiation of that Venus-Neptune square that's going to last a few months here. It's going to get confusing. And once, when Mars hits Neptune in June, right in the middle of those eclipses, it's going to get even more confusing. And just keep your wits about you and try to figure out and discern for yourself what is true. We got the node switching, which gives us a very different energy, very hard to keep people locked away, essentially, and not socializing. So that's going to make a difference there. And we'll see how it all plays out. At the, if you saw my last video, if we bring us all the way to the end of November into December, I want you to watch. There's Jupiter and Saturn. They're in the end of Capricorn, moving direct at that time. And if we move through several days, 13th, they start getting really close. In fact, they conjunct right there. You notice they're both at 29 degrees Capricorn. This is about 10 days before Christmas. And then they're going to cross over. Saturn crosses over first, but not leaving Jupiter too far behind. And then Jupiter crosses over a couple days later. So just before the winter solstice, we have Jupiter and Saturn taking each other over the threshold from Capricorn to Aquarius. To me, like I mentioned in the last video, this really signifies that Aquarian freedom, etc. So I really think that there's going to be a sense of, when it comes to the virus itself, kind of defeating it and getting it off the radar as far as something that's going to last many years, that we have to, have a new normal and everything else. I think we're going to kind of see the actions that are taken when Mars, look at where Mars is at that time. It's not a coincidence, because Mars will be finishing up its square to Pluto, the same when it's starting in August, when all the action starts taking place, and the possible, alternative approaches to attacking the virus, etc. There you go. It could be game over at that point. So August to November into December is kind of the finishing line where the old guard, the old plans, could fall away completely. And then Jupiter and Saturn start a new cycle that takes us into the next year and beyond. Okay, that's a 20-year cycle. So it'll be 20 years before Jupiter and Saturn hit each other again. And this one is a very significant one. It just marks that kind of new beginning, the new freedom. Okay. And so not only, on the surface level, the virus itself, but also the systems and structures that are falling apart as a result of this approach to the virus. Okay. And of course, the media makes the good guys and bad guys look how they want them to look, but it's up to us to discern, what is in the best interest of people, and what is in the best interest of the pockets of the corporations that not only own that media that gives us that message, but also profit from the pharmaceutical kingpins, et cetera, which is that old energy, which is that old structure that's coming down. Anyway, that's what I have for you. Hope that gives you a little sense with some more visuals about the planets. Hopefully it wasn't more confusing. But anyway, let me know if you have any questions. You can always contact me through YouTube or at my website at sovereignharmony.com. I'm also providing readings at this point. So individual readings, relationship readings, that kind of thing. And if you've had a reading with me before and you know anyone else that would be interested, let them know. But with that, I will let you go. Thanks for stopping by and listening. And I will see you again later this summer. Enjoy and get all the fresh air you can at this point. Bye.